Hello and welcome to the Sight and Sound Video History Series of the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. I'm Tom Walton. The history of Toledo and Lucas County in Northwest Ohio is a rich one indeed, and our guest today truly qualifies as an expert on the subject. He has written about it, he has lectured about it, and today he's going to talk about it with us as we examine the life story of Clint Mauk and his passion for history. And Clint, known you for a long time. Always learn something new when we're together, and I'm sure today will be no different. Welcome.
Hopefully.
Let's talk a little bit about your personal history first. You were born on July 18th, 1927.
Correct.
Clinton Alva Mauk, a fifth-generation Ohioan. Your roots in the Buckeye State go back quite a ways,
yes,
don't they?
Yes.
You were named for your grandfather, I believe,
Right.
Clinton Alva Mauk.
Right.
Now, he died in 1933 when you were 6, I believe.
Yeah, he died early. I think it was prostate cancer, probably.
Okay. Do you have any memories at all of?
Very few, just barely.
Uh-huh.
They lived in the old West End, the house that became Miss Rose School. You may have heard of Miss Rose School. It's a private school for little children, and very popular in its day as a private kindergarten, if you will. And that was my grandparents' house. It's kind of interesting, oddities. You know, that place called Andre's on Summit Street, the old bar and grill, they just closed. Very popular. Well, in 1898, my dad was born in that house.
Oh my goodness.
That was a nice section of Toledo, up the river there in Vistula and so forth.
Yeah, talk
At the
about your
time.
roots going deep. Indeed,
Yeah.
they do. But your early childhood, I believe, was spent in Eagle Point
Right. Eagle
area
Point
in
County,
Rossford. Now, you have any special memories of your childhood years you can share?
Oh yeah, it was an ideal place for boys to grow up, and that were just my brother and I, the two boys that were the sons of Carl Hoke, the architect, and Henry Werner had a boy. That was it. But there were only 25 houses in that whole subdivision, and we had the run of fields and streams and hills and tall trees and a river, open, empty spaces. It was an ideal place for boys to grow up. There just weren't many of us. We loved it. It was, in those days, you made your own fun. There were no things with your fingers.
No video games,
none
no
of that
texting.
Stuff. We were outdoors until the lights came on the streets, and then you went back in. It was very healthy.
That was
We
really a
grew
different
up
time.
outdoors.
Different time in America,
Entirely
wasn't it?
different
Great
time.
time to be a child.
It was, and I would look with some fear at the way the kids are growing up today, that they can't write, they can't spell, they can't do basic math. It really worries me, but I'm too old to change my life for it.
Now, you talked about what a great time it was to be a child in America, but of course it was a Depression era, wasn't it?
It was the
Did that
Depression.
affect you at all?
Oh, yes. It was an interesting time. My father lost his job from the family business. They had to let him go because there wasn't room for a salesman at the time, and that's what he was. And his father laid him off, if you will. Times were hard, and I remember them vividly. I mean, the word steak in those days was hamburger. Only my mother would make it in a big one patty and then carve it like it was a steak. Times were, I was too young to take real meaning from it, but I remember it vividly. I mean, my mother worked like a slave in the house and doing things, and she went out and did professional typing for the junior league and places like that needed a typist. And she made needlepoint stools and door rests and stuff that she sold. And yet the interesting thing was, and this has stuck in my mind forever, all through that, we had a maid, but that maid was thrilled with $5 a week, 1 day off, and free room and board. That's how hard the Depression was. She was thrilled to have that job because she was eating and sleeping comfortably. It
Now,
seems a little weird, a contrast.
oh yeah, it's really something. Where did you go to elementary school?
Rossford.
Rossford?
I went to Rossford through the 7th grade. And the teacher in the 7th, Rossford was, and then a first-generation factory town.
Mm-hmm.
The kids that I was in school with had, most of these people were Middle European. And the kids I was in school with, you could tell that they still had that guttural accent. Though they spoke perfectly fluent English, it had a different accent to it. And in the 7th grade, the teacher asked, how many of you kids in this class are planning to go to college? I was the only one who raised his hand. Well, I went home and told my dad, and that was the end of that. He quickly arranged for a scholarship of some kind to Maumee Valley Country Day School, where I went a couple of years, and then to an Eastern boarding school, because he was determined that we had a long family history of Dartmouth College, and I was going to go there. I'd been registered since I was 3 months old, so I had to go there, and you weren't going to come there out of Rossford grades. And so it was a major change in my life.
You had one brother?
One brother.
Robert?
Bob, yes.
And then after elementary years, you moved on to Maumee Valley Country Day School, is that right?
Yeah, well, that's where Dad found a way to put me so I could get more of an
Would
education.
it be fair, Clint, to say that by Depression standards, your family was better off than most?
Yeah, absolutely. We were on a fringe of, I don't know how to say this, a fringe of society that we were never poor. No, my parents socially were pretty well connected, if you will. And that was a blessing to me. I just grew up knowing a lot of people that were very successful. I knew the people at Owens Corning and Owens, Illinois, and so forth.
Your high school years at Maumee Valley Country Day School, how did they shape you as a young adult?
Well, pluses and minuses. It was a terrible education for a man. This was a girls' school, basically, still. And they started taking boys in. Probably needed the money, I don't know. But the courses were broad generalities. I mean, the feudalism. We studied feudalism for a whole bloody year. Then when I got off to this prep school for my final 2 years of high school, they said, what happened in 1066? And I had no idea. But they slammed down on me as woefully uneducated in their standards. I went from the worst in the school till I got a prize book at the end of my first year as the most improved student in the school. I just had to change my whole thinking of what school was like. They believed in dates and hard facts and hard writing and
Interesting that later in your life, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you became that same person. Interested in writing, statistics, hard dates, and facts.
Well, I was an English major in college, and when Dad took me to the train station, we took the New England states east to go to school. Nobody flew or drove in those days. And I said, what should I major in? And he gave me a piece of advice that I give to hundreds of kids this day. He said, I want you to learn to read. I want you to learn to write. I want you to learn to speak on your feet. We'll teach you the lumber business. In fact, he says you can learn any business if you've got those skills. And kids coming out of college today, I had a bunch of college graduates work for me at the bank. They could do none of those, yet they were college graduates.
Yeah.
And so those are tools that are good for learning and going into almost any business.
Yeah. Now, when you graduated from high school, and I believe, just to back up for a moment, you went into the service.
Yes, I went into
World War II,
II, U.S.
Now,
Navy.
World War II was winding down at that point. What motivated you to go to the military?
Well, because the war wasn't over. The Japanese war was just building up. And if Truman hadn't dropped the bombs, we'd have lost a couple of million people trying to take over Japan. And a lot of Japanese would have died too. So it was not considered over by any means. It was just that the European theater was over. And I happened to have a neighbor who was a naval captain, and he said, Clint, you don't want to go in the Army, because those are the guys going to get killed. And why don't you go in the U.S. Navy? And there's a program for radio technicians. If you can pass the test on electronics, you can go in as a seaman first and you know, be right up there. Well, I don't know anything about electronics. I hate electronics, but I was a good memorizer, and I memorized the book, and I passed the test. And I went in as a seaman first class at age 17. The tears of my mother streaming down her face. At 17, you know, I just had my 17-year-old grandson visit last week. And I thought, was I that young when I went in the war? But fortunately, the bomb was dropped while I was in boot camp at Great Lakes. So for all practical purposes,
Sure.
now this was just who gets out first and last. And
So how long were you in the Navy? 2 years?
13 months.
13 months.
And I was shipped at Corpus Christi, Texas as a mess cook. And my mother could have cried. She said, what do you do there? And I said, well, most mornings I put a spoon of sugar in the guy's coffee as he goes by. But I said, some mornings I'm the butter guy, and I take a fork and I bend down 2 pines and I stab a piece of fork or butter and take the back of a knife and I put it on a guy's plate. She said, we sent
Coffee
you
and
to
butter,
the-"
that was pretty much
She
it.
said, we sent you to the finest schools in New England to do this? And I said, well, that's what we do. And well, anyway, I got pulled out because I'd had some intelligence tests and was put into the link trainer instrument flying area. So I was teaching pilots how to fly blind, if you will. There was an old system. Did you ever fly the old A&N system when the cone of silence in the middle, and they would find their way home to 500 feet visibility? And I taught that, and I was a lecture officer. That's where I learned to stand on my feet and give lectures, was up to full captains in the Navy. Loved it. It was about a 5-hour day. Mess cooking was a 16-hour day.
So your service ended after 13 months, and then you went on to Dartmouth.
I went on to Dartmouth
And
on the
when-
GI Bill,
Mhm.
which was a blessing because Dad, by this time my younger brother had caught up. So Dad now had 2 kids at Dartmouth. It's interesting that, you know, you talk about finances. The GI Bill paid $500 a semester. Dartmouth raised their tuition cost up to $500 to take advantage of the max. Now think of that. I think college cost about $1,900 a year. Dartmouth today is $60,000 a year.
Another indication you grew up at the right time.
Oh, it's amazing.
So you left Dartmouth. What happened next? Time to start a career?
Started to start a career, and Dad, I had been named after the founder of the company, so I had to work there. My brother was the smart one, so he was going to be an engineer. That was all worked out.
What company was it?
The lumber company
Mauk
was
Lumber.
C.A. Mauk Lumber Company, and that was my name, and that was my grandfather's name. So the first thing I did was shipped out west to go work in a sawmill for a year to learn the lumber business. Now this has got little to nothing to do with selling lumber as a broker over a telephone. As you can imagine, I worked at a sawmill, night shift, loading boxcars, and learning nothing what I was going to be using at home, of course. But I spent another year. We had an office in Seattle, so I did learn something about wholesaling in that office. So I was gone 2 years, and I came home and went to work for the family business. And
At this point, your dad's advice about learning to read and write and speak on your feet had come in pretty handy.
oh, God, I tell this to kids every day. Just told my grandson last week, you learn those 3 things, you can do anything. Really. Except I'm not including medicine and law, but basically you can. I went into the banking business. I didn't have any trouble. 17 years later.
Now, we can't overlook 1953 because that was a monumental year
Yeah,
in
well,
your
it
life. You
was.
had the good sense to marry a young lady who also had attended, I think, Maumee Valley
Yes.
Country Day School, Cornelia Kelsey Lathrop. Can you talk about your courtship?
Well, it was short. We you know, you're as dumb as a box of rocks at that time, you know. And how I was fortunate enough to pick out this girl is beyond me, except we thought we were the last two single kids on the block, because everybody got married right at the minute they got out of college, it seemed like. We had our first date in December, I think at a junior league dance or something, and I think I proposed on Valentine's Day, and we were married June the 8th. So
Wow.
it was very
And now
quick.
here we are, sit in 2013, and you just observed your 60th
Yes.
wedding anniversary.
I don't understand how I was lucky enough, because it wasn't being smart, but I was lucky enough to find this girl for the rest of my life, because she has been such a meaningful influence throughout my life on various important subjects, and I don't know how I was smart enough to do that.
Well, just a year after your marriage, you made another commitment. We'll talk about this for a little while, your experience with Rotary. You joined Rotary Club of Toledo in 1954.
Yes.
And here we are again in 2013, almost 6 decades later.
It's almost 60 years.
And you are still one of your club's most active members. What attracted you to Rotary in the first place?
Well, in a choice, my father and grandfather had been members. And my father-in-law and grandfather-in-law were both members. Walter Lathrop and his father that ran the Lathrop Company. So Rotary was just sort of, that's your next step. It was sort of automatic, if you will. And yet I was in Rotary about, I've forgotten how many years, 15 or so. And I had to close up the lumber company. Just when Wicks and Carter and 84 and all those people came into the business, there was almost no function for the wholesale lumbermen anymore. They were buying from our sources, selling to our sources. And then by the time you got to Wicks and Home Depot and Lowe's, it just
entirely different
there was
time.
no way, no matter how smart you were, that you could keep that business running.
Sure.
None of those people are alive anymore. In fact, I think there's only one lumber yard in Toledo today, old-fashioned lumber yard, and that's Wayne Lumber. So I had to close it, regretfully, paid off the stockholders, which were family, and went looking for a job. And it took me about 6 months to liquidate. We had a lumber yard full of inventory, collection of receivables. And so I started studying, what are you going to do next, you know. I had no idea. I'd never asked for a job in my life, you know. This was just, at 40 years old, I felt like I was on an island. So I studied D&B and the directory of the chamber, and I took some psychological tests and trying to figure out, you know, I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to work for a big corporation like an OI or an Owens Corning. I didn't want to work for a family business. I'd had that. And I didn't want to leave Toledo.
What was it about corporations that turned you off?
Well, I could tell you a story, but I probably shouldn't on tape. But
That's why we're here.
my father-in-law was adamant. He was kind of controlling. And he was adamant that I get an interview with Owens, Illinois, because they had a timber products division. Natural fit in his mind, not in mine. I knew it was different. They had a plywood business and something down in the islands, Bermuda, not Bermuda. Well, anyway, so naturally, all this connections, I went to see Ed Dodd. So this is before he was president, but he was in charge of forest products. And you remember Ed Dodd. A little hard to carry on a conversation with. And we spent an hour together. And by this time, I had met all the head of human resources and the head of this and that, all on the top executives floor. And I finally was over, and I came back out, and the head of human resources said, well, thank you very much for coming. Give me your resume, and we'll be back to you in a couple of weeks. I said, fine. My mind was made up, but I had all this entry level up here at the executive floor. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Owens, Illinois, addressed to Dear recent college graduate, we don't need you. It's just not as if I came in down here. I came in up here. So I said to my father-in-law, that's why I don't want to work for a big company. Perfect example.
Plus, they might have sent you out of Toledo.
Yeah, but they didn't know what they were doing. They just, I think, well, anyway.
Yeah. Now, we didn't talk about your family. I think it was about 1959. Your daughter, Elizabeth, arrived. Can you talk about that?
Now, she was not the first one. The first one was Jeffrey.
Oh, okay.
Well, the story before that, we were married in 53, and by about 55, my wife said, you know, I should have been pregnant by now. Now, this is where I owe so much of my life to her. I said, I'm having a lot of fun trying, but she said, well, I think we should get tested. Well, we got tested and turned out that I probably wasn't going to have any children. So we applied for adoption, all at my wife's instigation at Child and Family Services, which I think its name has changed a little bit, but they were in the adoption business. And we adopted first a boy.
56 would have been the adoption or so. 56, 57
About there, yes.
of the boy.
Yes.
And his name was?
Jeffrey.
And then Elizabeth followed about 2.5 years later.
We were fortunate enough to get a second one, which was considered the max. But we had an interesting turn of events. Family Services called us and said, we have a little boy we think you ought to consider taking. And 2.5 years later, they called us again and said, we have a little girl we think you ought to take. Now, this was not done normally. I mean, you were lucky to get the second one, and doesn't even compare to today's issues. But so we ended up with 4 adopted children.
Were any of them natural siblings?
No.
Okay.
No, they're all different, but today you'd think they were all natural siblings.
Sure.
They love each other, they love their parents, they're all successful in their own rights, and couldn't be a better family. But thanks to my wife for pushing me into this, I'd have just kept trying.
And you have grandchildren?
Oh, we have 6 grandchildren.
Wow.
And
One of whom is 17, I think you indicated.
oh no, he's, oh yeah, but the oldest one is 26.
Yeah. Okay.
His name is Clint Mauk, and he's out in Portland, still single, but we were blessed with 4 wonderful kids, and of course that's such an important part of life.
Sure.
At my wife's instigation, that we really got that done.
You told the story about how you came to know you didn't want to work in a big corporation after after the lumber company closed. You ended up in the banking business. That was quite an abrupt career change, wasn't it? From lumber to banking.
I had studied all these lists, and I considered myself a generalist. I could read a balance sheet. I knew about business, how to run a business. And as I looked through the list of employers, banking seemed to come to the top. I was a generalist. That's what bankers are. They deal with people. They deal with money. I had these skills, and I finally decided maybe banking's what I ought to do. And so I put my resume in my pocket, and I called up the only bank where I didn't have family connections. My father-in-law, Walter Lathrop, was on the board of Toledo Trust, and the Joneses, of which my aunt married Henson Jones, that the Jones-Webb combination owned the Ohio Citizens, and that was always almost related there. So I chose First National, where they didn't know me. And I got an appointment with Dick Height, and we talked. And he said, Clint, he said, we'd like to hire you. And I said, gee, you haven't even looked at my resume. He said, yeah, but we know who you are. He said, we'll pay you what you asked, and you can start. I said, no, wait a minute. I've got all these other appointments. I've got commitments. He said, well, I tell you, well, this is a nice guy, Dick Hyde. I don't know if you ever remembered him, but he said, I tell you what, the job is yours. I'll give you 30 days. Come back and tell me whether you want it or not. So I went out and completed these other interviews, but I had the job in my pocket that I wanted. And that's so I went back there and as a commercial loan officer. Well, I was there no more than 8 or 9 months when Chaz McKelvey was brought in as president. And he fired the VP of operations and the VP of branches and took me over to the swivel chair, that old bar below Smith's, and said, you've got a new job. You're now in charge of branches and operations, the computer system, facilities management, the whole thing. I said, geez, I don't even know where the computer room is. He said, well, you'll learn. I'm hiring you to manage people. The people that are doing now don't know how to manage people.
Once again, your dad's advice comes into play, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? People skills.
So I all of a sudden had a new job that I didn't understand, and apparently I did it pretty well, because when I retired, I had 65, 70% of the people worked for me. The branch system was enormous. The computer operations, bookkeeping and proof and all these internal operations, plus the security. I was the cops and robbers guy when we had a robbery, and the building management. I had that 17-story building. We owned it. So
I remember seeing a picture from an old edition of the Blade from many years ago. You had an active role in the development of something we all take for granted today, and that's the automated teller machines.
oh yeah,
Installing the ATM network
that was
for the
sticking my
bank.
neck out about this far. I talked McKelvey into letting me buy, I think 4 ATMs before anybody had them in, I think, Northern Ohio. I mean, I think Bank One might have had a couple down in Columbus. And these things would cost close to, I can't remember, a lot of money.
You remember the year approximately?
It was in the late 70s or middle 70s.
Long before we really
Way
came to take
ahead
it
of time.
for granted, yes.
And I stuck my neck out so far, and because we were pioneers. I had the Sanborn Steckity build a wooden model of an ATM, and I brought all our officers on board and employees in, and we had to pretend where a guy sat behind the machine and pushed out little slips and money and
$20 bills, yeah.
it just did a pretend stuff to learn people to learn how an ATM worked, because this was strange. We took an awful gamble. It paid off. I think when I left the bank, we had 50 or 60 ATMs, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah. Now, of course, they're commonplace.
They're
That's how most
everywhere.
people do their banking.
They're almost in drugstores, but those are all fee-driven. And
Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of our story, but you retired in 1987. Does that sound
Yes,
right?
yes.
As a relatively young 60-year-old.
yes, I was.
The bank you helped build, was it downsizing at that point?
They'd had a bad year, and McKelvey decided that he was going to lighten the payroll. And he took 3 of us that were all vice presidents and gave us early retirement. I hadn't counted on it, planned on it, or anything else. I didn't know what the hell was going on. Mm-hmm. And so I took the money. It was not that much, but it wasn't a bad deal at the time, and left. And shortly thereafter, Rotary had their 75th anniversary, and Bill and I was the principal speaker. That brochure, that's a glossy brochure of my speech at that time. Bill Webb was there in the front row, and he came up to me afterwards and said, what are you doing for a job? And I said, don't have one. He said, well, I'd like you to meet with Bob Bell and I. We need somebody to build a development department at the Symphony. We're
Bob Bell, of course, being the longtime executive director of the Symphony.
Absolutely marvelous guy. I said, gee, I don't know. I've been having talks with the museum. that was sort of the place where everybody went for a retirement job, you know. And he said, the museum doesn't need you. They don't need money. We desperately need money, and you know how to raise it. And I said, okay. So we had breakfast, and I went to work for them. Every penny they paid me, I gave back. I had a wonderful, about 3 years. I built, they had no development department of any sense. The endowment fund was maybe $2 million. Today it's 19 million or something like that. So I hired people, put them in charge. We had a fundraising. We planned some long-term fundraising for the endowment fund, and we had a department. And I did that for 2 or 3 years, and they wanted me to work about 70 hours a week. By this time, I was going pretty well. I said, hey, I'm not even making money on this, and I really didn't have this in mind. I think I'll retire. And so they hired to replace me a young lady by the name of Kathy Carroll, who is now runs everything over there. Smart gal, does a magnificent job. And I went back to the other retirement. I didn't want to work that hard, because it was a killer.
Was that, what would be the primary difference for you as you shifted from corporate banking to nonprofit fundraising work?
I had always, another one of those lessons my father taught me. He said, now you're a Toledoan, your grandfather, your father, your uncles, your aunts, I mean everybody, there were Kazmeyers and Days that were all related to the Mauks, and he said, there's certain responsibilities you have, and he taught me from the beginning that you're going to be active in the United Way. I'm a 20-gallon blood donor, because my father said that's what you do. And I was active in the church, and he just sort of said, this is what a guy in your category does. You work for the community. And I didn't learn it from Rotary, but it fit right in with service above self. Sure. This is what I did. I worked on I don't know how many boards, and and got very active. And I founded the Episcopal Church in Perrysburg, St. Timothy's, with a lot of other guys, and it's become very successful.
Sounds like, Clint, your father had just a profound impact on your life, and you were still a relatively young man. I think you were just 42 when your father passed away.
Yes.
In 1969. That must have impacted you greatly.
It was amazing. I was working, it was a Saturday morning, and I was working at the bank, just trying to keep up. And I got a phone call from my wife, and she said the Perrysburg police just called and said that your father died in a barber chair in downtown Perrysburg. And they were thoughtful enough to say, why doesn't your son go and talk to your mother before, don't want the police coming to the door, which was very thoughtful of them. Mm-hmm. So I raced home and went to my mother and explained things to her and so forth. But it was a shock because he was young, and we didn't see this coming. There was no indications that I knew of that it was coming.
Yeah, suddenly you were the head of the family.
So I was, and
a lot of pressure on a young man, both at work and obviously at home at that time in your life. And Clint, we need to talk about a chapter in your life that was a difficult one for you, and that was your battle with alcoholism. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was, I was born in a time when everybody drank, in the Prohibition. This was what was all going on in those days. And alcohol was a part of life, way more than it is today. Today it's wine and, But in those days, when your doorbell rang, I think of this, when your doorbell rang, you opened it up, and whether it was a stranger or an old friend, you said, come on in and have a drink. Come in and have a drink. Or if you had a bad day at the office, you better go home and have a drink. If you had a good day at the office, you better go home and celebrate. Drinking was an incredibly integral part of life in the 20s and 30s. Prohibition had a big impact. Hell, so they made bathtubs, yeah. My father did, but everybody drank. And I grew up in that thing. My grandmother, when I was 14 years old, we were at her apartment in the Commodore Perry for Christmas something, or Thanksgiving. She said, I don't want you to learn to drink out there in the street. You're going to have a drink right here first. So she made me an old-fashioned, straight bourbon. 16 years, I'd never drank. But she was going to make sure I didn't learn it on the outside from those bad guys. She was going to learn it from her. Ridiculous to start at that age.
And you ended up learning it very well.
Well, there was no question. I was one of these guys that wanted to quit. I knew when after my retirement I was drinking too much, not during the day, but nighttime. But I sure gave her hell then, and every Saturday you'd say, I'm going to quit drinking on Monday. But I was that eager to quit, but I didn't know how. And of course Monday came and went, and everything was the same. And my wife, as I say, the treasure of marrying the right woman.
This is Cornelia.
Cornelia, Pat, she's called, had a intervention, secret intervention. I was in the bathroom shaving, and she said, why don't you come out? The kids are here. And my oldest son and his wife and the baby, which is now 26 years old, and the head of our church, the professional intervention alcohol advisor, and all my kids were there. They'd snuck in. And I knew in the minute when I saw it, I knew enough about it.
You knew what was going on.
This has got to be an intervention. And they had it planned where I was to be on a plane at 4 o'clock in Detroit, and I was going to California, where there was a private institution that dealt with this. It turned out that the psychiatrist that ran this institution in California, he was on permanent hold with Owens Corning Fiberglass for any of their employees. Molly Beschenstein, Pat went to her for advice, and she said, this is the guy to go to. We keep him on retainer at the company. And so I went out there for the normal 28 days or something. But I was sober the first day. I had no breakdown problem at all.
You didn't resist
I don't know.
the intervention?
I looked forward to it once this was a hurdle that pushed me over the edge, and I welcomed it.
And what year would that have been, Clint?
Oh boy, 22 years ago, 23 years ago.
Okay. And you've been sober since?
Absolutely. I have never had a drink, and I have no desire for a drink. Now, some recovering alcoholics can't walk past the old bar they drank in. They can't resist that. But I have no interest. I've gone in bars. I serve. I've got a liquor cabinet at home. I serve drinks at dinner parties. Anybody wants one?
Thank goodness for Cornelia, huh?
Thank God for Cornelia. Pat, we call her.
Let's move past that and talk a little bit more about your Rotary years. Certainly one of Toledo's most prominent Rotarians. Few have been a Rotarian longer.
No,
you've
only
seen,
John Clement.
Yeah. You have seen a lot of change in Rotary over the years. In fact, you were president of your club when it was still an all-male organization.
Yep.
Now, today, of course, in 2013, many, many women serve in Rotary clubs all over the country, including the Toledo Rotary Club. I suspect that pleases you.
Oh, absolutely. They work 10 times as hard as the men. I can tell you, you look at Toledo Rotary, and every one of those ladies is on a couple of committees working hard. It's amazing.
Should it have happened sooner?
I think it was an event that came at the right time. I think it was somebody in California that broke the mold, and immediately it spread all over the world.
So for all those years, you accepted it as an all men's organization?
Never thought about it. It was a men's club. You didn't think that was wrong, or that we should have women. Nobody, that didn't occur to us. And when we would, but Rotary was one of the first ones in Toledo to follow the example that had started in California, and I fought for it. We had members that threatened to quit if we took a lady in. They didn't. But I thought it was great. The first we took in the postmistress that ran the U.S. Post Office in Toledo, and another lady who I can't think of right now.
Well, my guess is it took quite a bit of courage on their part, too, knowing they were going into this situation where some of them weren't going to be welcomed.
But they weren't in the positions in the business world that they were by being shy. Mm-hmm. You know, she was a postmistress when most of them were men, so she'd done this before. Mm-hmm. I can't remember her name now, but.
Now, your club's foundation, the Toledo Rotary Foundation, has distributed well over $150,000 or so a year to worthy projects out and about in the community. That's an impressive record of giving back, wouldn't you say?
I think it's fabulous, and I think their endowment fund is somewhere around $3 million now, and I think that's wonderful. I just if I could win the lottery or something and put a couple more million in there, I'd love to, but because they do so much good, and they research each donation so thoroughly, mm-hmm. that I'm just pleased to be a contributor to it.
Your club is one of the oldest in the world. It was founded in 1912, mm-hmm. And also one of the largest.
Number 44.
Number 44, and also one of the largest with well over 400 members. Can you talk about some of the special projects that club has undertaken? I mean, you just observed your centennial a year ago, and done a lot of good deeds. The one I'm thinking of specifically, Middle Grounds Metro Park.
Well, let's go back further. Right after Toledo Rotary was founded in 1912, there was a fellow, Lord, I'm having a memory lapse. We'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, Rotary got involved accidentally in the crippled children's movement. Now this is, to me, is of enormous importance worldwide. Charles Fieldback was president, and the district nurses came to us and said, we have a little boy in his teens that was born without hands or feet. And I wondered if the Rotary Club would take a look at him and see if you could do anything for him. Now this was the beginning of what now the worldwide theme of every Rotary Club in the world, and there's 35,000 of them, is serving the handicapped. And it came from right here from Toledo, Ohio in 1914 or 15, when we took Alva Bunker and took him up to a hospital in Detroit. And 3 years later, he came out with hands and feet, artificial. This kid couldn't talk as a teenager. He couldn't smile. He didn't know how. He lived his life in an alley behind the drunken father's house on a skateboard that he'd made out of a roller skate and a piece of wood. That action, 3 years later, Alva Bunker walked into the Rotary Club of Toledo, climbed the steps to the stage, took over the microphone, and thanked the Rotary Club Rotarians for what they'd done for him. Now, if that doesn't bring tears to people's eyes, I don't know what does. Mm-hmm. And he led a successful life after that, as a chauffeur and a car mechanic and various jobs. That started a movement worldwide of serving the handicapped by Rotarians. And to me, that I have more pride in that one single issue than anything else we do, because it was so important worldwide. You can't go to a Rotary Club anywhere in the world that doesn't say, we deal with crippled children. Mm-hmm. We serve them. And that started right here in little old Toledo. The Toledo Society for the Crippled Children started in Rotary. The Ohio chapter of crippled children started in Toledo Rotary. The national chapter for crippled children started in Toledo Rotary. We now call it Easter Seals. Mm-hmm. But it all started here. I think that's a fabulous story.
Indeed
I
it
love
is.
it.
And here we, and I think the club adopted as its centennial project, as we mentioned, the Middle Grounds project. Can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that?
Well, that was, we wanted to do something special for our 100th birthday. And we had committees, you know, and they came up with this idea of this park in downtown Toledo. Toledo never, Metro Parks had never had a park in downtown Toledo. And they missed it. They knew they should have one. They found this piece of ground at the foot of the high-level bridge. It was just a junkyard. I think somebody said they took out 10,000 truckloads of garbage to clean that lot up. And it's a beautiful place now, and it's got a beautiful view up and down the river. There's plenty of space. It's lengthy for jogging trails, bird watching, fishing piers, a central, picnic area with a covered. What's the word I want to use?
These pavilions and
Pavilion.
picnic pavilions.
And all that. At the same time, while we're down there, we're going to honor some of the old Toledo Rotarians that were all parts of this fabric that we developed over the years. And, you know, I go back far enough. I knew a lot of them. I mean, the Levis brothers and
Sure.
and so forth, and Libby. And I didn't know Libby. But Rotary has had an immense impact on Toledo, which I'm proud.
Now, somewhere in this amazing journey of your life, you discovered and cultivated a love for the history of Toledo and our region. Was there a eureka moment, or was there an epiphany in which you realized, I really feel passionate about this?
Well, it really started, I think, in 1981 when I was president. And in those days, the presidents liked to have sort of a theme behind their presidency.
This is Rotary we're talking
Rotary.
about.
And so at the beginning of each meeting, I gave a little 5-minute historical tale. And they kind of liked it. And so 20-some years later, in 2004, somewhere, a fellow by the name of Walter McGee was elected president of Rotary. And Walter knew his faults. And he said, Clint, he said, I'm not very exciting. And I love being the president, but I don't have any. How about jazzing up my meetings with one of your old history stories of Toledo? I said, why not? One or two, he said. Well, one or two turned out to be 40 or 50. It took a whole year. Every Monday.
I sat in on most of those, and I learned a great deal. You must have enjoyed being part historian, part educator.
I loved it. I spent every weekend researching a new story, whether it was about ships or bridges or, all the things that people don't think about. The history of bridges in Toledo. It's fascinating. There's a whole chapter on it. And then, of course, when you get into the Prohibition and the Lickavoly Gang, the founding of Libby Glass and Owens Corning.
Well, that role certainly continued for you after that series of lectures came to an end. When you put all that expertise into a wonderful book, and this is it, it's called Historical Tales of Toledo, which you wrote and which Rotary published in 2004. Was it that series of lectures that inspired this book?
Oh, absolutely. Those are the lectures in there.
So basically the book wrote itself after you had delivered your series of lectures.
The only trouble was my stories at Rotary were pretty much oral tales, a few notes maybe. So I had to go back and rewrite them in longhand. I didn't have a computer, and neither did Rotary at that time. And somebody at Rotary retyped them all, and then they formed a committee, said, let's publish a book. And I'm thinking, Xerox and a staple in the corner. No, they and one of the Rotarians, Jeff Roberts, said, it's got to be a coffee table book. Let's make it right.
And here it sits on our coffee
And
table
I said,
at the library.
Who the heck's going to buy it? Besides my mother, it's just, we've printed 10,000 of these, and it was all done by Rotarians. I mean, whether it was publicity or editing or paper supply or anything, it was done by Rotarians.
Well, let me make a little bit of full disclosure here. It was my pleasure to serve as your editor on this project. But I have to tell you, Clint, you did all the heavy lifting. And what I found especially appropriate was the page in the book that describes you not as the author, but as the storyteller. I suspect that distinction was important to you.
I consider that what I am today as a storyteller. I've given over 400 talks to groups beyond, and I've got one call 2 days ago asked me to do 3 different talks for 3 different groups for the same lady. So I'm booked out into next year, which I love. It gives meaning to my life and liveliness to my step, if you will. This gives my life purpose, and I love it.
As a matter of fact, the cover of the book does not say written by Clint Mauk. It says as told by Clint Mauk. That was part of the plan, right?
Yeah. Walter McGee had a lot of, he's the one that asked me to give some talks to liven up the beginning of the program.
Yeah.
But he and his wife had an enormous part of the editing of this and finding the proper pictures and stuff. They were just great support.
Yeah. And for sure, I must let people know this is no dry history textbook.
Oh,
the
no.
chapters in this book are relatively short, and I would imagine part of the plan was to appeal to younger readers.
Younger readers, I would say age 10, can read this book, and they should. And I'm sure a lot of people in Rotary that this book's gone all over the world. We printed 10,000 copies, and we're less than 1,000 left. And Rotary's going to want to keep a couple hundred just for special occasions.
Could the day come when there's a second printing?
No, I don't think so.
So if you've got one, hang
The
on
only
to it.
way
It's a
the only
collector's
way we're
edition.
selling them is out of the trunk of my car.
Okay.
My father taught me, you can't sell from an empty wagon. And I got tired of these bookstores demanding 50% of the selling price and no assistance whatsoever.
We talked about the young people. Do you think that generally speaking, there's not enough appreciation by today's young people for our rich history?
Oh, there's none. They don't teach history in school anymore. I think the state
So it's
of
not the
Ohio.
kids' fault.
What?
It's not the kids' fault then.
It's not the kids' fault. The state of Ohio requires 1 semester of Ohio history in the 4th grade. Now that's pretty dang young to expect a lot of. I think the kids in the I put one of these books in every school in Northwest Ohio, every private, public, Jewish, Christian, whatever. They've all got that book, and of course all the libraries do. And I go out and I encourage children to read this. The only way they're going to get a knowledge of this history. I mean, we've got all this excitement about the War of 1812 this year, and kids are waking up to this. But I have taught kids as little as, rugrats, because the private, home educators, they have groups, and they invite me in to teach their kids this history. And I've had great success with some of the Catholic schools, but not with the public schools.
Now, you mentioned the War of 1812, and certainly the Battle of Fallen Timbers, a significant part of this book. Would you single that out as one of the most important chapters?
Well, no, I think the three battles, Fallen Timbers, Fort Meigs, and the Battle of Lake Erie, they go together. They're what opened up the whole Northwest Territory to the Pacific Ocean. We were stopped. It was the Battle of Fallen Timbers that, for the first time, showed that Americans could take care of their land. First time. That was big news. We think of it as a minor incident, 1-hour battle, but it was very important.
A lot of Americans don't really understand, do they, how significant that 1 hour is to our nation's development.
Oh, it was. Mad Anthony Wayne.
If that war had gone the other way, your parents, your grandparents, French Canadian?
On my mother's side.
Yeah, we could all be speaking French today, right?
We'd be speaking Canadian at least. Absolutely. The Canadians celebrate the War of 1812 more than we do.
Well, let's talk about some of the other chapters in this book, because I found them all fascinating. We talked about the Battle of Fallen Timbers, Lake Erie, and so forth, Fort Meigs. But What about the Willard Dempsey fight? We're talking about, that was in what, 1919?
July 4th,
This was a
1919.
huge deal.
It was a worldwide deal. People don't realize the things that have happened in Toledo. They had this fellow, Jess Willard, who was the world's champion. He didn't fight for 2 years, and he was an enormous man, 6'7" or 8", 280 pounds. And he had beaten the fellow named Jackson or Johnson in Cuba, who was the black man. He was the great white hope. That's where that expression came from. But he wouldn't fight, and nobody wanted to fight him because he was so enormous. But this fella, Tex Rickard, tried to promote a fight, and he went all around, and he finally found Jack Dempsey that said, yeah, I'll fight him. Jack Dempsey was 6 feet tall and weighed 180 pounds, but he was a good boxer. And one of the interesting part of the story is that Willard forced Jack Dempsey to sign a paper that said, if I kill you during this fight, I'm not liable. You can't sue me. Well, I don't know that that's ever happened before. They built a stadium for 100,000 people. And it was worldwide. I mean, people came from London and Paris.
This was out in
reporters out in Bayview Park.
Bayview Park.
People came from all over the world, and of course the United States. This was a big, big deal, and they prepared, thousands of sandwiches, egg salad sandwiches, ham and cheese sandwiches, and to sell. And they had 6 barrels of lemonade to sell, except the night before the fight, some drunk took a bath in one of them, and they weren't sure which one. So the lemonade didn't go over very well. And the day turned out to be, 95 in the shade, and all the sandwiches spoiled. There was no refrigeration.
And the day was spoiled for the champion too, wasn't it? As it turned out.
Well, but the temperature was so that only 25,000 people showed up instead of 100,000. And Jess Willard was knocked down 7 or 8 times in the first round, and Dempsey thought it was over. He started to leave the ring, and then somebody claimed that the bell had rung, so he had to come back and finish him in the next round. But it wasn't even a contest. But the interesting thing is that Tex Rickard, who had promoted this fight, even though there were only 25,000 people there instead of 100,000, made enough money to go and build a little place called Madison Square Garden. I think that's the interesting part of the whole story.
That's something.
Really.
Yeah. Now, you also deal in your book, of course, with the development of downtown Toledo, and many of us of a certain age remember some of what you're writing about, certainly the venerable Titke's department store, the downtown theaters, the Paramount, Valentine, of course. Just a really rich history downtown, isn't there?
Absolutely, and the whole story of when Libby came, when Ford came in Rossford, and the story of Harold Beschenstein building Owens Corning. They wouldn't pay him a salary, but they just gave him a lot of stock. Did him pretty well in the long term.
Turned out to be lucrative for him.
Yes, but Tiki, I give a lot of my storytelling at senior centers and garden clubs. They love to hear about Tiki's and the Paramount Theater, which is one of a kind practically, and the Quinoa Lowe's and the Trianon Ballroom, and all these stories of I grew up in that. I knew these places, and people. I one time went to a talk and didn't tell me in advance it was an Alzheimer's unit in a nursing home. I didn't know that. I said, what do I tell these people? Just go back a few generations. Well, I started out, anybody here know about Tiki's? Place lit up like a Christmas tree. Like a Christmas tree. And we went for an hour and a half talking about these places. Maybe over and over because, their memories are short. But it worked out beautifully. And so I have fun giving these talks. As I would say, I've got one coming up for 300 people and another one coming up for 20 people. And I have school teachers or retired MCO doctors and retired teachers and garden clubs and all
I
this
know
stuff.
you also talk about some of the more colorful characters in the city's past, and
Oh, yeah.
Mayor Golden Rule Jones, certainly
That's
one of
my
those.
favorite stories.
Is that your favorite?
It is one of my really favorites. I mean, I tell that one at church once in a while when I am asked to give a light sermon. This guy was so different. He invented the 8-hour day in the 1896. Imagine. He paid women the same wage as men, which was twice what the outside world was paying. He had a nursery for their kids. He had a lunchroom. I mean, this guy was ahead of a lot of people today in the things he did for his employees. No wonder and he had no time clocks. They worked an 8-hour day instead of 14 hours, which was standard. Paid $2 instead of $1. It was just an amazing man.
Gives some context to the name Golden Rule, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, well that was what was on his wall.
Mm-hmm.
No time clocks, just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Amazing man.
Michael Owens and his impact as one of Toledo's major industrialists.
He was more than major.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that made Ford and Libby wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that. But Michael Owens, who had a third-grade education, could not read a blueprint, could not mix a batch of glass, but he developed the bottle-making machine, where a glass blower might make 8 or 10 bottles in a 14-hour workday, no two of which were alike. He built a machine that would make 300,000 bottles in a 24-hour shift, and all were identical. He could package drugs and food and medicine and stuff, and beer. Mr. Walbridge, who was part of this founding part of Toledo and was with the Libby Glass people, got on his bicycle and went right out to Buckeye Beer to take orders for bottles of beer, because up till then you bought beer in either a bucket or in a keg. That was the first call I made was on the beer companies. Michael Owens also invented a way to make flat glass by bringing molten glass up on a moving table, and when it was at the other end, it was polished, flat, clean, cut it up and put it in a box. Up till then, which I think is remarkable, the Ford Glass Company in Rossford was making 6 million feet of window glass a year. And every square foot of that was made by a guy standing over a ditch, blowing a giant bottle, this big around, this long, and taking that hot bottle on a table, cutting the front and back ends of it off, slitting it down the middle, laying it out flat, and then polishing both sides. 6 million feet a year out of bottles. And that's the way window glass was made, and that's why the wrinkles and the bubbles are in it. And to me, Michael Owens solved that problem. He solved the bottle problem, which revolutionized the industry. I flat out will tell you that Libby and Ford and the affiliated people would not all be millionaires if it weren't for Michael Owens.
What a great debt. Now, you were making a point also about the success of your book, Historical Tales of Toledo. Did quite well, didn't it?
Did very well. We printed 10,000 copies. We've sold about 9,000 plus. Every penny goes to the Rotary Foundation.
And how much has that?
Well, it's
been?
over $150,000 as I understand it now. I take no money from it. I don't even charge mileage or anything. And every penny goes to the foundation, which I think is probably Rotary's biggest gift. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it is. And I'm very proud of that.
As well you should be. Clint, a lot of Americans believe that Jackie Robinson was the first African-American baseball player in the major leagues, and many of them might be surprised to learn that he really wasn't, that another man was the first back in the late 1800s. Can you talk about Moses Fleetwood Walker?
Yeah, Moses Fleetwood Walker. He's called Fleet Walker. Black man that played for the Toledo Toledos, or the Toledo Boot Stockings. They interchanged the names in 1886, I think. In that 1 year, Toledo was asked to join the American Association, which was the only baseball league in the country, which included Chicago and Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York.
Very definitely considered major league.
It was the major league. And in 1 year, and 1 year only, Toledo was asked to be a part of that organization. And that year, Moses Fleetwood Walker was playing for Toledo as a barehanded catcher, which just makes me sting when I think about
I
it.
can't even fathom a barehanded catcher.
He was a college graduate, and he went on to some success in the law business, but he was absolutely and technically the first black man to play in the major leagues. In that 1 year, when we were in the major leagues, we've never been before or since. And he was, so we, in fact, we just honored him with the selection from the Toledo Historic Group that
Civic Hall of Fame.
the Civic Hall of Fame. No, in the committee, I brought him up because the committee never heard of him. Never heard of him.
You could make a case he belongs in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about a period in Toledo's history, again, perhaps certainly colorful, but perhaps not a good period, and that was, and you hinted at this earlier, about bathtubs and gin, and bootlegging was a way of life in the 20s and the 30s, and it became part of the crime wave that Toledo had to deal with.
Well, Toledo not only had to do with it, but they were the crime center of the United States, if there was one. And this ties in directly to one of my favorite stories. Toledo was ideally located in this country for distribution. And the bootleggers knew this way before we did, that you could get to Chicago or Cleveland or New York or in a day's drive. Canada was right across the lake where they made legal booze. It was a perfect center for industrial expansion, which is true to this day of Toledo. And it was an interesting story because for a while it was just a peaceful place. Actually, Golden Rule Jones, in all his sainthood, was the guy that started letting underworld characters that were on the run hide out in Toledo. He said, "We'll never turn you in, just spend your money here, and when it's safe to go back to Chicago or Cleveland, go back." But then this fellow named Firetop Sulkin, who was just a wise guy, in those days everybody was on the take, and he knew how to manipulate this. He could walk in the mayor's office unannounced. He was a fixer, no education. He was a newsboy, and he was a tough. In those days, the tough kids, like we have today, came from being newsboys, which is an interesting sidelight, because if you had one of those choice corners like Madison and Superior, Madison, you had to be tough enough to defend it from the other guys that wanted it, because it was a profitable corner. There were no home deliveries. Everybody bought it on the street. And Firetop was one of these guys, and he manipulated himself up in the network until he realized he kind of knew where all the bones were buried in Toledo, how to fix things, how to get around. And he said, if I had a gang, I could own Toledo. And he went up to Detroit and he found this fellow, Yanni Licavoli, and convinced him to come down and they could own Toledo.
The Purple Gang?
Well, he wasn't the Purple Gang, but he enjoyed being thought of as that. Because it just added to his aura. But this changed the rules. Up till then, nobody used guns in Toledo. You could hide out here, do whatever you were doing, but no guns. Well, Yanni Licavoli came down and he changed all the rules. He brought guns and he used them. From day one, he took over the largest distillery in downtown Toledo. First he offered to buy it. The owner said, "I'm not interested in selling it. Why would I sell this?" So he killed him and just took it over. It was that kind of, there were bodies found up on Old Stearns Road and Old State Line Road, every weekend. People that, just lost that battle. There were exciting, tough times in Toledo in those days. Jackie Kennedy was a popular young guy that was in competition with Licavoli. Licavoli tried time and again to kill him. Finally did out at Point Place. Interesting guy.
Wasn't that the, if you will, the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of community's acceptance?
much,
They said, that's it.
community
Jackie
said-
Kennedy was immensely popular.
He was immensely popular, good-looking dude. He was still in an illegal business, but they didn't care 'cause that was the way things were running. He was a good-looking 24-year-old, always had a beauty queen on his arm, and the people loved him. And when they killed him out at Point Place, Joe Wop English and Whitey Basazy, that did it. The public turned, and that's when Fraser Reams stepped in. And a young Southern gentleman, a very mild-mannered person. I knew him very well personally. In fact, his son's still a good friend of mine. But he said, I will, if you elect me assistant district attorney, I will get this guy. Well, he did it by inventing something that we think is common today, wiretapping. And Fraser Reams wiretapped all these guys, including Firetop Sulkin, and put them all in jail, just as promised. He was world famous. Nobody during Prohibition had ever put in a crime unit, a gang of illegal gang into prison. Nobody had until Fraser Reams did it. He was known all over the world.
Prior to that time, it wasn't even safe to stand on a street corner. I mean, you could have a drive-by, a gang-related.
The whole thing was wild. It was wild.
And when did that all begin to turn? When was Jackie Kennedy killed?
Well, now you're testing my dates now. I'm going to say 32, somewhere around there.
Depression era, Prohibition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People don't realize how important Toledo was, both from the criminal aspect, from an industrial aspect. Toledo was hurt worse than any other city in the country in the Depression, because we had more industry here than anybody else. We had a huge industrial base, based on our location. And the other point that I keep making is water. We're sitting on the edge of 20% of the world's water. And there ain't very much of it.
Fresh water.
Fresh water, potable water. 0.7% of all the water in the world is fresh. And we're sitting on the coast, the shore of 20% of it. Can't take that away from us. Water is becoming more and more of a desperate commodity, as you can imagine.
There's an interesting piece of Toledo history that I think is fun to mention. I'll bet few people who view this conversation will be aware that the University of Michigan, and this goes back to the Ohio-Michigan War, actually considered putting a campus in Toledo.
Well, they had purchase rights for 1,200 acres on the river, downtown Toledo, to build a campus at the University of Michigan, the first campus.
And of course, the presumption was that it would be
It was
within
in
the state of
Michigan.
Michigan
It was
and would
at that
remain
time.
so.
It was in Michigan at that time.
What happened?
Well, the Ohio-Michigan War, which is one of the greatest, my favorite story. I've been telling it a lot lately, but it was a huge, armies on both sides with weapons and serious, but only one guy got wounded in this whole war. It was like a comic opera war. People put in prison, got out of prison, secret trips. They finally settled Lucas County as being in Ohio by sneaking into Toledo in the middle of the night and going into a church and signing papers under candlelight and blacking out the windows. This was so secret. There were 2,200 Michigan soldiers waiting to come in the next morning to stop that meeting. So they came in the middle of the night, escaped on their horseback. Mr. Conant from Conant Street in Maumee, Judge Conant had the papers in his tall silk hat under there. They rode away and he hit a branch, knocked the hat off, lost all the papers. They had to stop and regroup and find them again, and finally got into Maumee about 6 or 7 in the morning. And at about that time that the Michigan soldiers realized that they'd been duped and never stopped it.
So we
Toledo
came
was
that close to being
Toledo was
Toledo,
in
Michigan.
Ohio. But and one of the interesting sidelights is that Robert E. Lee was one of the surveyors on the second survey of where that Michigan-Ohio line was going to be.
And it's the line we have today.
It's the line we have today.
Clint, I know you are a man of strong faith, you and your wife, and you helped establish St. Timothy's Episcopal Church
Yes.
in Perrysburg. How did you happen to get involved in that project?
Well, almost not willingly. You know, I had four little kids and an old friend, and sort of shirt-tailed relative, Tom Day, was one of my neighbors from Willis Day, and he said, the bishop has found that Perrysburg is the one place we need to build a new church for the Episcopal Church. We all went to St. Paul's in Maumee at that time. And he said, so there's a group of us going to start this church. We want you to join us. I said, geez, you know, I can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cost money. Well, yes, you can, and, you know, we'll do this. So I joined in this gang, and we built a church. In fact, it's interesting that little church on East Boundary in Perrysburg is the first commercial building built by the Rudolph Libby Company. Up until then, they were sort of house builders and remodelers. That was their first commercial
Interesting
project.
little tidbit. Now, I know you also were very active in creating the Black Swamp Conservancy.
Yes.
Why was that important to you?
Well, I was sort of assigned by a lady by the name of Virginia Stranahan, Diddy Stranahan. I was on the board of the 577 Foundation from the beginning, and she said, Clint, I want you to be on this other board because we want to protect this property. She had her mind for a long time. They were not going to subdivide her estate. And the Garden Club of Perrysburg, were behind this. And there was a lot of push to get that place protected, and we found out the real best way to do it was with a conservation easement. We didn't know what that was, but we learned in a hurry from Nature Conservancy that it was a permanent protection forever, in perpetuity, of a piece of land. And it rode right on the title. So we started our little conservancy with a group of us, and that was our first project, and went on from there. And now I'm proud to say we're probably the finest land trust in Ohio, and doing very well.
Now, that might also help explain your interest in cultivating the land, and you are something of an expert on organic gardening, is that right?
I got into composting way back. I had beautiful gardens.
Long before people were doing that.
Oh, before. I taught the people of Perrysburg. In 1992, they passed a law in Ohio that said you could no longer put yard waste in landfills because they're filling them up. And so the people in Perrysburg asked me to teach composting to the citizens because I was been doing it for some time. So I had several sessions in the gymnasium or the big public meeting rooms in the Perrysburg High School, 3 nights of explaining what composting was and giving everybody that was there each night a compost bin made of steel wire, you know, that I bought at Anderson's. And it worked. I mean, right from the beginning, you didn't see Perrysburg citizens having trouble trying, what do I do with my leaves now or my stuff? And then the city of Perrysburg asked me to write an article in the Perrysburg Journal about composting. Well, that turned out to be 19 chapters, and I published a booklet on that, on Clint's Compost Corner. And that was people still come to me and ask for that. That was years and years ago. But I loved gardening, and I loved organic gardening, and I've taught it many times. Not so much now because I'm more involved with the book stories.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Clint, as we sit here again in 2013, and we talked earlier about your wonderful wife, Cornelia. You celebrated your 60th wedding anniversary together just a month or so ago. Congratulations for that, by the way. What is the secret to such longevity for a couple?
Oh, God, I don't know. I did everything I could to kill myself with smoking and alcohol, and I had lung cancer and removed a lung, and I dove off a cliff in college and broke my neck, and I shouldn't have lived. And I'd say I've tried to kill myself, but it didn't work. I don't have any secret to longevity. I had every reason not to live this long. And I'm blessed that Pat's lived as well. and we're really blessed to have each other. She needs me to drive because she can't see that well anymore, and I need her for everything else. So she's been a real star in my life. I don't know how to describe it. I mean, between the adopting children, I'm not sure I'd have ever made that decision, or teaching me to not drink. There were major changes in my life because of her. And when I changed jobs from the lumberyard to the bank, I mean, she was most supportive and said, yeah, we'll work this out. I didn't know if it was going to work or not. But no, she's been a star my whole life.
We've talked about what you regard as some of the weaknesses that you've endured and dealt with over your lifetime. What do you consider your strengths?
Oh, Lord, I don't know. I like to talk, I guess. But Dad again taught me you got to serve your community. I've been on how many boards and historic Perrysburg and stuff like that, and all these other speech and hearing clinic. But I've been a good fundraiser, but only for one reason. I know people. That's why the bank wanted me, and that's why the symphony wanted me. And you got to know where the bones are buried if you're going to be a fundraiser. I raised a lot of money for that church just by a few visits.
I got to ask you about your fondness for bow ties. That's sort of legendary at your Rotary Club. Is there a story there?
Not really. I just started wearing them for some reason, and pretty soon they got to be tradition. When you got a thing, you hang on to it. Now I walk into Rotary, if I don't have a bow tie on, 20 people will stop me and say, where the hell's your bow tie? Same way at church.
Tying a bow tie is a lost art, isn't it?
For some people it is. It's just very simple for me.
But Clint, you're in your mid-80s. You're still vital, still vigorous. You got a whole lot of life still to live. But as you look back, are there any regrets?
Oh dear. Not really. I think I've been pretty fortunate. Timing is everything, and it just all sort of worked out. This book it's changed my life. It was a total accident. I had nothing to do with that. I'd be sitting around or dead by now if I didn't have the storytelling that I do today. But the whole thing, the kids recovering from alcohol. I've had several surgeries of other kinds. I don't know why I'm still alive, but I am.
But all of that made you who you are today.
Just lucky.
The good and the bad.
Yeah. No, we've had a wonderful family. The Lathrops were wonderful people to us, and my mother and father. We just grew up, as I say, that edge. Once the Depression was over, everything kind of went slowly back up to normal. But it's been a great life. The more I look back on it, and I think I've been very fortunate.
Have you given any thought to your legacy, given your interest in history? How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, I'd like to be remembered as, for service above self. I think I've lived that life pretty well.
The Rotary motto.
Yeah, it's Rotary's motto. I've lived that, and I love being a storyteller. People stop me on the street and say, "Aren't you Clint Mauk?" I mean, my God, who likes that? Doesn't like that kind of fame? Well, they've been one of my lectures someplace, and then people call and say, "Are you still doing this? Would you give a talk to my group?" As I say, they call up all the time. People I'd never heard of.
Yeah. Well, Clint Mauk, thanks so much for the gift of your time today. And of course, we thank you for your interest in the Sight and Sound Video History Series of the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. And we hope to see you again. Till next time, remember, keep reading and keep learning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.